This video contains solutions to the take-home problems number 5 handout. All of these are going to be solving equations, and the equations are going to be coming in different forms. Now, they're all going to end up being what we call linear equations, but we're going to get there in various different ways. In this equation, we need to do some simplifying on the left-hand side before we can try to get the x by itself. So if we multiply the negative 2 and distribute that through the parentheses, what we get is negative 10, and then minus 2 times minus 3x is plus 6x, plus 8 equals 4 plus 5x. Continuing to simplify the left-hand side, collect like terms, 6x is by itself, and then minus 10 plus 8 is minus 2. And now we have a choice whether to subtract 6x from both sides or to subtract 5x from both sides. I'm going to choose to subtract 5x from both sides. That's going to give me my x on the left-hand side, which is usually where I like to see it. So 6x minus 5x is just x, so I have x minus 2 equals 4, and then I can add 2 to both sides, and that gets me x equals 6. And that's my solution. This time we have an equation involving fractions, but we still have a distribution to do. So we've got to distribute the 1/2 on the left-hand side, 1/2 times x, and 1/2 times minus 1/3. So 1/2 times x is 1/2 x, and 1/2 times 1/3 is 1/6, and that equals 3/4 minus x divided by 6. Now there are different ways that we can approach it at this point, but what I would want to do is get rid of all those crazy fractions. So I want to find a common denominator between 2, 4, and 6 that when I multiply it by both sides is going to get rid of all of the fractions. So the least common denominator here, the least common denominator for 2, 6, 4, and 6 is going to be 12. So if I multiply both sides by 12, that's going to get rid of all the fractions. Now I need to make sure that when I do that multiplication that I distribute. So I'm going to do this a little bit more carefully than you might want to, but if you feel comfortable enough to skip some steps, go for it. But I'm going to multiply the 12 by both of those terms, and same thing on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side. 12 times 3/4 minus 12 times x over 6. Now I can simplify. 12 and 2 divide out, leaving me with a 6. 12 and 6 divide out, leaving me with a 2. 12 and 4 divide out, leaving me with a 3. And 12 and 6 divide out, leaving me with a 2. So this gives me 6x minus 2 equals 3 times 3 is 9 minus 2x. And this looks much better without all those fractions. So I can add 2x to both sides. And I'm also going to add 2 to both sides. I'll do both of those steps at once. That gives me 8x equals 11. And then one last step to divide both sides by 8 gives me x equals 11 divided by 8. Now in this equation we have an x in the denominator, but we're going to approach it in the same way. We don't have any distribution to do, so all we want to do is try to find a common denominator between x and 3. And when in doubt, you can always find a common denominator by multiplying the denominators together. So the common denominator is just going to be 3 times x, also known as 3x. So I'm going to take both sides of this equation, which I'm going to rewrite here, 2 over x minus 1 over 3 equals 4, and I'm going to multiply both sides by 3x. And again, I'm going to do this carefully, so again, if you feel comfortable, you can skip a couple steps here, but what we want to do is distribute this 3x through our parentheses. So on the left-hand side, we get 3x times 2 over x minus 3x times 1/3, and then 4 times 3x on the right-hand side is 12x. Going back to the left-hand side, this x and this x divide out, and this 3 and this 3 divide out. So we end up with 3 times 2 is 6, and then x equals 12x. Add x to both sides. That gives us 6 equals 13x. And then all we have to do is divide both sides by 13, and we get x equals 6 divided by 13. Similar problem here. Again, we've got fractions, and again, they have x's in the denominator. So one approach here is to think about having a common denominator, which is again just the product of the two denominators. So the common denominator here is going to be 2x minus 1 multiplied by x plus 2. And there's no reason here really to multiply that out. I want to leave it as that factored form of 2x minus 1 times x plus 2. That's going to make what I do next easier. So there's no real reason to do that multiplication. And what I'm going to do is multiply both sides by that product. So on the left-hand side, multiply by all that stuff, 2x minus 1 times x plus 2, and same on the right-hand side, multiply by 2x minus 1 times x plus 2. On the left-hand side, the 2x minus 1 and the 2x minus 1 divide out, and on the right-hand side, the x plus 2 and the x plus 2 divide out. So on the left, we're left with 3 times x plus 2, and on the right, we have 5 times 2x minus 1. Now we distribute 3 times x, 3 times 2, 5 times 2x, 5 times 1, and now this looks a lot like the equations that we've been doing before. I can subtract 10x from both sides, and subtract 6 from both sides. We'll do both of those steps at once. 3x minus 10x is negative 7x, and negative 5 minus 6 is negative 11. We'll divide both sides by 7, negative 7 I should say, and that gives us x equals negative 11 over negative 7, but the negatives divide out, and so I just get 11 over 7. Finally, we have an equation that doesn't look linear at first. It looks like this is going to have some higher powers of x, but as we'll see, those higher powers of x will go away. On the left-hand side, we multiply this out just by distributing, and we get x squared minus 4x. On the right-hand side, we're going to have to multiply out those parentheses, which we can do using FOIL. So the product of the first terms, x times x, is x squared. The outer terms are x and 2, which gives me 2x. The inner terms are 1 and x, which gives me 1x. And then the last terms are 1 and 2, which gives me 1 times 2 is 2. Simplifying the left-hand side and the right-hand side gives me x squared minus 4x equals x squared plus 3x plus 2. And now what we see is that we can actually subtract x squared from both sides, which gets rid of them entirely. So now we have negative 4x equals 3x plus 2. I can subtract 3x from both sides. That gives me negative 7x equals 2. So x equals 2 divided by negative 7, which we would typically write as negative 2/7.